Well, things are beginning to unravel for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after 6 bodies of hostages were found from an underground tunnel in Gaza. The news led to spontaneous protests all over Israel, blaming Netanyahu for the failure to secure a hostage deal. While Netanyahu has now vowed action, protesters and family members are now demanding an immediate hostage and ceasefire deal. This, as Hamas says, 3 of the 6 hostages whose bodies were recovered were on a hostage release list.
Almog, we love you and you'll always stay in our hearts.
Grief and anger on the streets of Israel as the IDF discovered bodies of 6 hostages in an underground tunnel in southern Gaza.
A few hours ago, we informed the families that the bodies of their loved ones had been located by IDF troops in an underground tunnel in Rafah. According to our initial assessment, they were brutally murdered by Hamas terrorists shortly before we reached them.
The dead included 23-year-old Harsh Goldberg, Poland, and 4 others abducted at the Supernova Music Festival on October 7. Israeli forces said the bodies were retrieved from a tunnel in Rafah, barely a kilometer away from where another hostage, Koyet Farhan Al-Qadi, was rescued alive last week.
In order to stop this and to save lives, there is one thing that must be done. For lives to be saved, Netanyahu must be immediately replaced.
Protesters have vowed to bring the country to a standstill, saying Netanyahu needs to go if the hostages are to live. They single out Netanyahu's insistence on the control of the Philadelphia corridor for the failure of the ceasefire deal.
We are here in the 330th day that the hostages, 107 hostages, are still in the hell tunnels in Gaza. And I want to talk about the decision of the Prime Minister at the last Friday. He decided that the Philadelphia access is much more important from the life of the hostages. And I want to tell him that he's making a war crime. He's a war criminal. He's a mass murderer by his decision.
While Israeli ministers reportedly backed Netanyahu's demand for the control of the crossing at Thursday's cabinet meeting, Israel's 12th channel says Minister Yoav Gallant and security chiefs repeatedly urged him to compromise. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has warned of another October 7 attack if the IDF does not carry a preemptive strike against terrorism. Opposition leader Yair Lapid and the mayor of Tel Aviv have called for a nationwide strike for the release of hostages, even as the Israeli Prime Minister vowed revenge.
In recent days, as Israel has been holding intensive negotiations with the mediator in a supreme effort to reach a deal, Hamas is continuing to steadfastly refuse all proposals. Even worse, at the exact same time, it murdered 6 of our hostages. Whoever murders hostages does not want a deal.
Adding to the anger, Hamas claimed the recovered Israeli hostages were due to be released in a proposed prisoner exchange deal. Facing angry protesters at home and a rebellion in his own cabinet, the question is, will Netanyahu agree to a deal to bring the remaining hostages back?
All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by Adrian Calamel from New York. He is a fellow at the Arabian Peninsula Institute, a terrorism and Middle Eastern scholar and author of the forthcoming book on Hezbollah. Adrian Calamel, thanks very much indeed for talking to WION this evening. Now, the hostage deal has been in suspended animation for months. Many in Israel itself believe that if Netanyahu wanted, he could have got the release of the hostages and ended this war already. Has he failed his own people, even as he has brought wide-scale destruction to Gaza?
Thank you for having me. And I don't think you can put the blame on Netanyahu. You have to look at Hamas has repeatedly rejected deal after deal after deal, 8, 9, 10 different deals. What they want to do is they want to remain in power. I see so much pressure being put on Israel, but the pressure is not being put on Hamas. Hamas knows that the hostages equal leverage, and what they want, Hamas, is an immediate ceasefire and really a permanent ceasefire where they're allowed to maintain their presence in Gaza. Israel has always wanted the hostages back from the very beginning. You had the early hostage exchanges, but since then, there's been absolutely no traction except for a couple hostage rescue missions by the Israelis. So we have to look who we're negotiating with. If we're negotiating from the Israeli side, and we're negotiating with Hamas. And when you negotiate with Hamas, they keep on moving the goalposts.
Yeah, but how do you come to the negotiating table when you have been bombarding the Gaza Strip for over several months and over 40,000 people are dead? So the negotiations are going to be tough on both sides. But having said that, now Hamas has said in this case that 3 of those 6 hostages who have died were on a release list. And, as the streets are filling up with protesters in Israel, Netanyahu and far-right leaders like the finance minister are warning of a massacre like October 7th, more strikes. So where does it go from here?
So when we look at what just happened with the recovery of 6 bodies in Rafah, in the areas where they've been told not to go into because they're holding all the hostages in that area, this is a cynical, evil ploy by Hamas to, one, apply pressure, internal pressure on the Netanyahu government, which has been successful, to also say that 3 have been on a list for release. Do we know that any of that's true? And then let me add, they included one American, an American, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, whose parents spoke at the DNC, who has a very high public profile in the United States. So that is for the United States to apply more pressure on Israel. That's how Hamas is calculating this. It's very cynical. I hate to think in these terms. I expect that we may see more of this. Hamas is clinging on for survival, and these are last-ditch attempts for them to stay intact.
Where's the pressure from the U.S. on Netanyahu? They're giving them billions of dollars in aid. There's weapons that are coming in. They're striking and bombarding the Gaza Strip every day. But yet they haven't got the hostages. Now, internally, there's a lot of turmoil and demands that there should be a hostage deal, there should be a ceasefire deal. You can see those protests, visuals on our screens. Netanyahu is being asked to deliver. What do you think about that?
Well, if you look at, when I talk about U.S. pressure, there's been leaks signaling that we're withholding 500-pound munitions. So you can look at that. You can look at the pressure that they've put on the Netanyahu government with putting a 3-phase plan in front of them that really doesn't have any tangible benchmarks. It's just kind of very nebulous as far as the language goes, and it doesn't address the very heart of the matter, is release of the hostages. I would like to know what Joe Biden's plan is for release of the hostages. His idea, or this administration, has been just hope Hamas deals in good faith, call a ceasefire, have Israel withdraw all the troops for at least 6 weeks, start negotiations, and then maybe we'll get some hostages back.
There isn't any good faith in a war, Adrian Calamel, but I do want to point out that, going back to Netanyahu, as you can see, there are protests from people, from families, but there are also protests within the cabinet and from members of the Israeli government and the opposition. Benny Gantz has been opposing, Netanyahu, and with the Philadelphia corridor, he says that Israel should have ownership of that. A lot of people in Israel don't agree with that. That's been a sticking point for the ceasefire deal, the 3-point ceasefire deal that the U.S. has come up with. How do you negotiate with so many different caveats?
Well, here we have to look at the grand scheme of things. This is a war that the Islamic Republic of Iran has initiated. They have multiple fronts open. This is one of the fronts that's in Gaza. Right now, this has been a protracted 11-month struggle now. Israel likes lightning fast operations. This has not been that. So it is nearing its conclusion. Everybody wants a diplomatic solution, but sometimes there's only military solutions. I understand that there's been tremendous bloodshed, but there's just a complete unwillingness for Hamas to negotiate. And we have to remember who started this, who invaded and then took back hundreds of hostages. 101 still remain in captivity. So I don't know where the lines of negotiation are. Ultimately, the problem rests with the Islamic Republic, the report right before we came on were the Houthis, trying to link their activities to this conflict. So it's failed foreign policy all around. It could have been prevented, but here we are.
Well, absolutely failed foreign policy. Adrian Calamel, thanks very much indeed for talking to WION this evening and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.